Hi guys, my name is Heather Gorka, and today I'm going to be going over my observation of an integrated pest management plan for large broiler facilities. What I'm going to go ahead and cover today is we're going to take a look at the commercial broiler chicken operations, what comes with such large operations like this one, rules, regulations, and recommendations for broiler bird operations, and what I have found and should be considered when operating your own. So the first example that I wanted to go ahead and show you here is how the chicken has changed. So as you can see, since 1957, we have done a lot with selective breeding to create the broiler bird that we know and commonly used today for chicken production. It is not the same as your backyard chicken. So while these may be the traditional breeds that you are used to seeing, um, the broiler bird is much larger, and personally this past season I tried to raise my own, and my argument always used to be that I hated not seeing those pretty white birds outside, but I learned very quickly with what we've done with selecting these breeds, it makes them not able to enjoy stuff like the other birds did. Like as you can see here, the broiler bird is much larger. So while your backyard chicken may take 5 or more months to reach full maturity and weight, these are done in just 8 weeks. While we can see the pros, with them not really needing a whole lot of time to get to weight, there are some drawbacks with health. So I saw this myself when I did some this year, and these ones are alive, they're not dead. One of the biggest issues that you can see because there's so much weight on their bodies going on their legs is dislocated hips during fights between multiple ones, jumping on each other. They can also have this issue as well. And I saw it with actually several birds that I had. I also noticed too, the one time I did try to put them outside, they did not do very well as they definitely had breathing problems and quickly struggled with heat exhaustion. So I went ahead and I wanted to look at the generally accepted agriculture and management practices and the plan for that. This is an awesome guide, and I saw for broiler birds, it's more so off of pages 58 through 63 that give you the suggestions and the recommendations as far as what you should or need to do for your broiler bird operation. And I also did include a link right here to go ahead and bring you to that. Also, another good form of information that we have is the U.S. Poultry Industry Manual. So this, while it is 178 pages, it is full of a lot of information that you need to know as far as the rules, regulations, building recommendations, ventilation, transportation, everything that you may need or have questions about. And also, there's a link for that as well. So with the USDA, like I said, they're going to go ahead and cover your stocking density, your drinking, your heating system, your feeders, your litter, everything. It's not just to buy a chickens, put them inside of a building and see how it works. There are several aspects that you need to think about when creating a business like this. While I also did find from GAAMPS that in their manual on page 64, it'll talk about the broiler management guide from Cobb. Cobb is one of the 3 large companies that does the distribution of the broiler birds that we commonly use, and they offer a 112-page guide that goes through literally every single aspect from building design to how to raise them, feed consumption, etc. There's a lot of information that you could potentially cover for this industry. While it would take me probably a couple of hours to go through every single aspect, I hope to cover as much as I potentially can to give you a really good idea of what this industry entails. So first I want to cover buildings. Um, there's a couple of different layouts that you can have for these, which you can have a 40 So you can have a 66 foot by 600, which is going to hold 600 birds, or 46,600 birds, or you can do the 43 by 510, which is going to hold 24,100. So the project that we were doing for this, it wants to have the idea of around 50,000 birds. So with that in mind, we would probably select the two buildings and do the 43 feet by the 510, which would give us approximately 48,200 birds. But we also can keep in mind that you could do up to 5 flock rotations in a possible year. So doing, 50,000 birds, that's only one flock rotation potential for your buildings. With your buildings, you also have to have lots of ventilation. You're going to have ventilation for the end caps, as you can see here, but depending on what kind of building setup you decide will also depend on what kind of ventilation and how much ventilation, like we see here, that you may potentially need. While this project that we are covering is talking about using dirt floors, I did want to include this picture as well because this is one of the newer options that we have, where you have the open graded floors, which is supposed to potentially decrease the risk of pathogens and pests and stuff, and it's supposed to create a cleaner environment. But we're not going over that, but I just wanted to go ahead and give that as one of a visual example for this presentation. This here is another much larger example of the broiler bird buildings. But typically these houses are going to be enclosed, and they're done so to be able to limit the possible exposure from wild animals and diseases that they could bring to your flock. These houses, they should provide adequate heat when needed for the colder months, when the chicks are smaller within the first few weeks until feathers are developed. These houses must also provide enough ventilation for the flock to remove buildup of carbon dioxide, ammonia, and other stuff that's not really good for their lungs and for their health. The ventilation also should make sure that you maintain the humidity levels in the buildings. Birds create water vapor when they breathe out. So it is very common if you're not making sure you have adequate ventilation and it gets too hot, you may think it's okay, but they'll get pneumonia. Other building ideas to consider, as we see here with our dirt floor example, we do have to worry about other contaminants. So the way the flooring of these buildings and the side walls are placed, they can help with controlling your biological controls. So concrete slabs that go beneath your soil layer can be used to decrease the likelihood of invasive species and bugs, and also wildlife and rodents. So as you can see in this example, we have open airspace with high bottom wall borders, as well as the dirt floor, like we're looking over for the project for today. And as you can see inside of here, you have lots of open ventilation too, but they probably have screens on those as well to protect the inside of the building. So insulation, while it comes in many different forms, is extremely important, especially in Michigan, because we do run into those colder months. And how you place and what you choose for your insulation is really important, cost-wise and efficiency-wise. So as we're looking at it, the insulation is usually placed under the roof and in some cases in the side walls and end walls to try to hold heat into the building. In the summer months, it provides a barrier to exclude the heat. Buildings, it just depends on the way that you are building it, the different side walls, but how you can see with large walls, commercial fans, the air inlet, it allows fresh air to be able to come in, and we can also see that some fans push out air as well. So I found this example online and I loved it. It showed all the different little things that we have to take into consideration when setting up and putting one of our buildings together. So how your feed is going to be distributed, how your lights are set up, how your sidewalls and ventilation, your feeders, your waterers, everything. And then you also have your mechanical controls because some of these are going to be on timers, monitors, sensors, and it's really important not only for your pest management system, but also for the health and being able to monitor the birds correctly. We have several options for different controls, but making sure that we follow the recommendations and do what we need to bring the birds to a good finishing weight. all of these aspects of the operation are very important and definitely need to be considered. These are a couple different options that you can have for airflow, whether it's kind of a more closed off system or if it's a more open system. I think it just depends on your area, maybe how many buildings you might have close enough together to be able to retain heat. But while the fans are very important, the side walls and how your coverings and windows are important as well. These can definitely reduce costs and ensure that the fresh air is vented into the buildings for the health of the birds. Again, ventilation, I know I've covered it a couple of times, but it's super important. Without adequate ventilation, the birds are super susceptible to upper respiratory infections, as I mentioned, and other health conditions that can thrive under very moist and warm areas. Super perfect for bacteria growth, which you don't want. Every aspect counts when considering setting up your broiler bird operation. Cutting corners, while it may seem financially beneficial in the moment, it's going to have it could have its drawbacks. It can increase your mortality, which overall is going to decrease your profit, but it's also going to create unclean, could create unclean, hazardous work areas. All aspects count. All aspects of the things that we are going and covering for today, it's important and to take into consideration when creating your own building operation. Litter. What kind of litter you decide to use is super important. As we can see here from Cobb's guide, we have a bunch of different options, and depending on how wet your area gets, what your cleaning schedule is planning, like there are some recommendations that say if you haven't had any sick birds in your flock that you can actually reuse litter. It requires you to put another layer of litter over top of the old litter, but in some cases, depending on your litter quality, you can get 2 rounds out of one application. But we have different options. I personally, out of all the choices, really like the pine sawdust or the pine shavings. I think that really definitely helps with the ammonia smell. But we do have other options and stuff between rice puffs, paper, and straw as well. I personally am not a huge fan of straw. I think it stinks when it gets wet. Another thing to cover as far as operations is convenience. So as you can see inside of this picture, the feeders and the waterers actually raise above. And they do this not only in between feeding times, as you can see the waterers are still left down there, but when the workers need to come through at the end of a finished, when the broilers are finished and you're going to be doing the cleaning in between, the old flock that just left and the new flock that's coming in, you kind of want to be able to get in there with equipment. So having these on the pulley systems to be able to raise and lower when needed is extremely convenient. So I want to go ahead and cover a couple of other aspects, the necessary or unnecessary evils of the industry, but birds, especially chickens, are cannibalistic. So we do take a couple of precautions to try to prevent as much damage as possible. While toe trimming is kind of more of a thing for turkeys, I have and did see it mentioned a couple of times for the broiler birds as well. But one very common thing for broilers is beak trimming because they do have a pecking problem. I was originally going to add my rose-colored glasses in here as a cute, funny haha, but actually as I went through and read a lot of rules, recommendations, and regulations, some of these are banned in other countries because of how you have to install them. Some are punched, pin punched in through the front part of the beak so it can't come off. But since chickens, when they see red, they attack, there was an inventor, Andrew Jackson Jr. in 1903, who invented these cute little chicken glasses. And it was intended, like I said, to decrease fighting and mortality within your flocks. So there are a couple of different options with these. I actually found the plastic ones on the bottom. Some came with a hole, so some could have like a little pinhole to see through the front, but the rest of them were kind of set as like blinders, so that way the chickens can't see straight ahead and attack and have issue, but they kind of have that side view, kind of like how you see for horses. New babies, when they're brought in after they have maybe been vaccinated and have gone through any of those, beak trimming or glasses if the farmer chooses to use them, um, they're going to be set into the area in these little baskets before they're dropped onto the floor. We don't necessarily always use the entire building when bringing in a new flock. So this is a brooding setup. So as you can see from the Cobb guide, the babies will take up a fraction of the large barn that they need to be able to finish out. So you can use brooding curtains, which can also be good for energy saving because instead of heating the entire barn, you're heating a section of the barn. And as you can see from this demonstration, you're kind of keeping that heat in the designated area where the birds are at. Taking a look at other options and controls, looking at how your baby birds are forming and crowding or not crowding can really tell you if the temperatures that you are setting in those areas are too high, too low, or if they're actually just right and favorable for your chicken's conditions. As you can see from what I have here, if you've got them all crowding around the heat space, and then it's a little too cold in there. But if you've got your heat source and they're all really far away, it's a little too hot. This is the spacing that you want to see. You want to see even distribution from the feeders and waters and heaters. If you see crowding, it's too cold. So as you can see here, we don't really have crowding. This is kind of the feed operation, and this is probably most likely where the workers are walking through these cleared out areas where the birds aren't at. But this is a good setup, as you can see. The waters and the feeders, you're going to change the height over time. They're not going to stay at the same height because obviously as the birds get bigger, you want to go ahead and change that height of each of the waters and the feeders. So as you can see here, we've got, you can't really see, like they're kind of pretty much almost on the ground versus here, there's kind of that spacing underneath so they're not sitting directly on the floor. The broiler rations, what you're going to be feeding them, it's always going to be a high protein feed, lots and lots of calories. You are fattening these birds up. I did see some recommendations for the farmers that grew their own. It's predominantly just corn and soybean, that's it. But a lot of the formulated feeds, they're going to have an 18 to 20% protein. And depending on the brand that can be referred, it's usually a grower finisher. You start with the starter grower, which is going to be at the higher end concentration for the first like 4 weeks, and then your last 8 weeks you're going to use that finisher grower. The broiler bird breeding process is not easy. This is something that we've done over, in the picture that I showed you, was over 50 years almost. So it is definitely like a step down program. So I'll show in the slides ahead, we have 3 main companies that produce all of the broiler birds that we have. There are a couple smaller companies that do it as well, but predominantly most of them come from the top 3 companies. And they use a breeding program that is a step down system. So as you can see on here, you have your elite farm, which is going to have your main 2, like 2 genetics, which then they hatch, which then is going to go to the next one. I'll grab my pointer here. So they hatch and they go to their next one. And then as they breed that one, it's going to go in, and it's a continuous step down program until you get to the parent farm. So this is like the main farm that all of them are coming from when people order from. This is where they're coming from. These ones are the ones that are the step down that are working to make sure that this one has the genetics that it needs before it goes to the farms that we are producing them on. These breeding operations are done on a very large scale, and they use hatching rooms like you can see here. And I've seen some of them, like I like this example right here because it shows you the turner carts. So those first couple of weeks, they're on the turner tables like they need to be. And then after it goes through this process, when it gets closer to hatching, those last 5 days, these carts are going to switch out. They won't be on these little open trays anymore. They'll be on kind of like baskets for them to be able to hatch into. So I've mentioned a couple of times the main companies. So the broiler breeds, the three primary companies that we have are listed here as Cobb, Hubbard, I'm probably going to butcher this one, um, a vegan. So this one is listed as the largest company for broiler birds in the world. This company has at least 44% of the global shares in the market, and it operates in over 80 countries. So they're a big one. They're a big one. The next one on the list is Hubbard. It's considered the second largest company, and it's owned by Group in Grimard. This one, it's the largest multi-species animal breeding company around the world and is present in almost 100 countries as they offer the largest assortment of genetic products and meet the specific needs from different market segments. The one that I referenced a lot in here is Cobb, and it's also because they are recommended with the Michigan Guide as far as the consideration for how you should be setting up your broiler production facility. They were considered one of the hybrid breeds in 2007, and they focus on selection for feed conservation. Their view is that because feed is the single largest cost associated with producing broilers and chickens, they really want to make sure that you get a good product and that you're getting your money's worth when you're doing the work. So while the two other companies are top competitors, I found a lot of information that supported not only Cobb as their position in the industry, but also a lot of information that came from them to new and prospecting farmers. So there was a lot of information that I did find as far as budgeting, and there's a lot that can kind of go into it between the cost of the building, the cost of lighting, electricity, everything that can kind of play into your cost analysis from your broiler budget. And when you're kind of going in with all of this, your operating costs, everything that's going to go into it, your labor, it's not a cheap industry. And depending on how you have it set up will really depend on how profitable you potentially can be at the end of the year. Manure management is also very important as well. I found when doing the research on this that they did recommend for smell and to be able to follow local ordinances that you can remove the litter, but then put it in a house, another separate house on the property that you then can heat to be able to kill bacteria and viruses that can be found in the litter. And then it's dry compost, which then can be used as soil amendments or sold to local nurseries or even used in your own fields as well. The watering systems, we have a couple of different types that are on the market. I personally liked these that had the little water catch beneath because it decreases the amount of water that you have on the floor versus these little nipple systems. You can get leaks in these if they're not installed correctly. As we can see too in these two pictures, they're a good example, like I said, about raising these as they get bigger. Well, you don't want the chicken to be able to, or you don't want it to be reaching its entire body up to be able to go and try to get the waters. You do want them to be extending their neck up to beginning to the nipples. Feeders, we have a couple of different kinds that are on the market, but as you can see, they're usually dispensed feeders. That's why this one's got so much little stuff on the top of it. They're set up on automated systems that are going to fill these at certain times of the day. This was a cute little video that I found that I wanted to include. Let's see if it'll let me click on it. Well, originally when I recorded this, I thought it did have audio. I don't believe it does. Um, these are a really good example to show you the automated feeders, the automated feeder systems, and how they can be set up. And they're really useful. And even though these little ones, it's so cute, they're getting inside. Obviously, as they get bigger, that doesn't become an option. I would personally recommend checking them to see if any get stuck over time, though. You can see these ones are a little bit smaller holes versus the other ones have the bigger holes because the birds were a little bit larger. Great example. I liked these ones too because it decreases the amount of possible waste that you can have too. So adult poultry and game birds when you're delivering them. So when they're transported, you need to make sure that they have adequate ventilation and spacing on the floor should be provided. Hot weather is a time where you really need to take some caution. The birds should be protected from heat stress by being shaded or moved during dark hours. Quick unloading and auxiliary ventilation is essential when the birds are reaching their destinations during the transportations in cold weather. And the birds should be protected by use of windbreaks and potential coverings. And this is recommendations and stuff that I found not only from the USDA, but the Michigan and also that Cobb guide. They all said the same thing, every single link that I found. You need to make sure that they have ventilation. And I saw this too with my own experience. They get heat exhaustion very, very easily. If you do not make sure that they are vented, if you do not make sure that they're protected, you're going to have issue, you're going to have loss and death before they make it to their destination. Biosecurity and controls to take into consideration. So we have quite a few things to take into. So insects, weeds, predators, and pathogens are all issues that you could potentially have in your flock. So I want to go over a couple of the managing factors and how they contribute to the health and safety of your flock. Death and disposal is extremely important. If you leave these around, not only can you have issues with cannibalistic tendencies of the other birds, but also the increase of bacteria and viruses that can be present. It is important to make sure that you are following proper practices for dead animal removal, as well as seeing if you need to have a contact for a dead animal dealer if you decide to go that route. Mice can be extremely problematic and they also carry disease um, and parasites as well, which can become an issue for your flock. So making sure that you don't have any little holes and broken boards and such around the base of your enclosures is important to keep these little feisty things out. Safety on your structures is not only for your flock, but also for those that are working in the building. The pathogens that can potentially thrive in dirty, unkept buildings can be very hazardous, not only for the birds, but for the humans that are working in these conditions as well. Every aspect does count. So as we looked at that other visual example, this is another good one as well. It shows you, feed, litter, chicks, rodents, equipment that you're going to use, other poultry and livestock pets. If you have multiple if you're doing chickens on one side of your land and cows on another, you're going to have to think about any cross pathogens that you may run into, which hatchery you're going to use, insects, people. All of these are things that need to be considered. Cleaning is a very important aspect of this industry before and after any birds arrive. So taking the steps can help prevent anything crossing over. And if you've had an issue with a flock or a flock tests positive for something when you're doing a soil test or sending in one of your dead birds because you're trying to figure out what's going wrong, you need to make sure that you have the proper routine in place for your cleaning protocols. As mentioned before, and you can see demonstrated in the pictures, installing a system to be able to raise and lower for the feeders and waterers is extremely important. As you can see, these floors are cleaned all the way. This one might be a little shiny, but it still might be a dirt floor. This one, on the other hand, looks like this might be concrete that they may have put bedding over top of. So a couple of sprays that I found that were recommended for this industry. Larvadex was one of them, especially for those larva, fly, um, and beetle species that can carry mercs. It's really important to make sure that you have some sort of liquid application to prevent. And a lot of these are okay as long as you follow the instructions of applying them. So like this one, it says labeled for fly control around chickens, layers, and breeders, but do not apply the product so that it exposes workers or other people. So it's been tested. Some the ones that I've listed here either come from the USDA or come from those Cobb recommendations. These are the ones that are considered good, even the boric acid, even the residual controls. This one kills the adult beetles that I spoke of, same as these ones as well. Pharmaceutical, when that aspect, everything that I read, you need a licensed vet. So you need to get and have a relationship with your VCPR. If you do not have one, then you need to find one, because a lot of the medications and stuff, they are only allowed to be given to your flock by an actual vet. So insects, there are quite a few. Um, But one of the issues that we can see sometimes, though, is these buggers are so small, and it's usually you don't notice that they're a problem until they're a problem. But to cover a couple of these, the northern fowl mite, the heavy population of this one can decrease your egg production in chickens. But while this one does the egg production, it also can affect the growth and vigor with other ones too. It's just they don't make the birds feel very good. And when you have these, or if you do see that you have an issue with these, you should do what you can to eradicate them. Um, Unclean conditions, you can definitely end up getting the chicken mite. I've actually seen this myself my first or second year of growing chickens. Um, and these are bloodsuckers, so they're going to decrease your weight. They're going to decrease the um, vigor and the growth that you have for that bird or birds. The dumpling mite's another bad one. It's invasive. It burrows into the skin near the base of the chicken's feathers, and it can also cause the chicken to pull its own feathers out because it'll cause itching and irritation. A couple other ones that we can see are the chicken body louse. Um, It'll target new feathers. It'll also target dead skin, cause itching and irritation. The shaft lice. We can see this with unclean conditions, but can also cause issues. We also see the winged lice. It's more common again in unkept conditions, but can be seen in younger birds and can cause health issues. I wanted to show the visual example here. As you can see, fleas. Fleas, again, unkept, dirty conditions. Your soil, your litter, whatever method you're using, it is extremely important that you keep it clean for the sake and the health of your birds. These, on the other hand, these darkening beetles, these are really bad. These can carry mercs and they can multiply so fast. I've seen these on the property before. Using controls for these is extremely important for the health and the safety of your birds. Poultry diseases are also common. Botulism, Petroleum. These are all issues that you can see. And again, all of this is going to be, a lot of these are going to be found with unclean, unkept conditions. You can also find issues with these with cross-contamination from other birds, which is why it's important to make sure you don't allow like barn swallows or other birds to come in. It's where we end up seeing issues with like avian flu and such. You don't want outside pathogens being able to cross-contaminate into your broiler houses. Having also issues with worms, tapeworms, and gape worms, you want to make sure that anything you can do to make sure you're not having other fecal matter from other species, or if you ended up having cross-contamination in one lot of birds, you do what you need to for your biosecurity, protocol to clean the area, dispose of the bad infected birds to ensure that any birds that you work with later on don't have the same issue. We do have, aside from mice, while mice aren't necessarily predators, we do have a couple of predators that can become an issue. If you're not making sure that your sidewalls are screened in, like I mentioned before, you can have hawks swoop in and steal baby birds. We also have issues with raccoons getting in. I personally have had a lot of issues with raccoons, and if they can find a way in, they will get in. Same with fox, especially around the base and your doors and openings. If you're not making sure that your building is secure, you're going to lose money because you're going to lose birds. These are just a couple other that can get in. Skunk and possum, I've also seen myself. And even your own house pets, you got cats that are supposed to be out there getting mice. They get hungry enough, if they decide to, they could get in there too and kill some baby birds and do some damage. With this, we can also see that making sure that your weaknesses of your structures are secure, and also doing deterrents and live traps, depending on what kind of issues you may be having, can be successful with minimizing this issue. So while we discuss budget again, I wanted to go ahead and take another look at some of these costs that we may have. So, we can see the fuel costs and car and truck expenses, litter, repairs, supplies, insurance, taxes. You want to make sure if you do have a large loss that you are insured, that you are protected to make sure that you don't have a complete loss. I'll go ahead and play this video. And as we go through, you can see there's fixed costs, which, may depreciate, but then you also have your total costs. And a lot of this can become extremely expensive depending on what exactly or what issues you may run into. Again, we're covering the operating costs, and we can see right here, it's pretty expensive. So a lot can go into an operation on a scale such as this one, and we've gone over several factors, looked at cost analysis as we can see, and there's also a lot of rules that we must be able to follow to be able to operate the facility. A normal typical cost for one of these buildings can range from 25 to 30 grand, depending on what kind of ventilation system, heating system, watering. Lots of factors can go into the price range for this. And upon the research that I was doing 5.5 flocks per year on an average farm, you use a lot of electricity too. So these are all things that you need to take into consideration when you're looking at your cost analysis, as far as how much it costs for the feed, how much it costs to run your building, how much your labor costs, how much your equipment and your fuel costs are, as well as what is your potential profit. And you need to make sure that you are taking into consideration some of the factors that we covered, your disease management, your insect management, and your predators that are a potential risk for your profit. Because if you do not protect these in the end, you will end up falling in the negative versus the positive, and you'll end up owing money at the end of the season instead of being able to profit. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to go ahead and go over all of this with me. I apologize it was so long. I will go ahead and take and let this video go over the references for just a few moments before we end the video, and I hope you have a good day.